There are things, let's say, psychogenic pain, right? It's based on anxiety, and all that. That type of thing generated pain. I think it is probably software problem. The actual hardware structure is okay, right? But obviously there's also hardware problem, but the hardware seems already healed. It's just the communication with the previous software hasn't been updated.
Today I'm talking with Fan Wang. Fan is a professor of brain and cognitive science at the MIT McGovern Institute and leads the Wang Lab at MIT. Her research focuses on the neural circuits of pain, addiction, and sensory motor loops. She also teaches an undergraduate course on the neurobiology of self. Thank you for being here, Fan, and I'm excited to ask you all about the neuroscience of pain perception.
Thank you, Max, for having me. Pleasure to talk to you.
One of the things I wanted to start with was the story around your research. I'm curious how you came first to ask the questions that you're now interested in.
I was always a science nerd, I would say. Even in high school, I felt like I'm much more interested in reading about science than going out, hang out, to do other things. So I felt very early on I am going to be a scientist. Okay. Then I came to United States and I did my PhD studying smell, the olfaction. And one thing that during that PhD time that really sort of struck me is when my mentor, Richard Axel, was saying, let me backtrack a little bit. We were studying the maps in the brain that map from periphery receptors to the olfactory bulb to the cortex, right? That's sort of this pathway that from odor getting into the nose all the way to the brain. And it's really beautiful, intricate circuit. And Richard once said, now that we see a map, who is reading the map in the brain? There's no ghost in the machine. And this word, there's no ghost in the machine, particularly sort of stayed with me. And I wanted to understand who is the knower, right, of any of our perceptions. And to think about that, because we always say, I know it, I smell something, I feel something. So the question is, where is this I located in the brain? Or is it in the brain?
So you were motivated by the question of consciousness to begin with.
To begin with, yeah. To really understand, I felt like the sense of self, and that's why I'm teaching the neurobiology of self now. And that then lead me to think, because usually we point to our body, as if the sense of self is sort of embodied, so whole body, right? So I figured I need to understand somatic sensation. That's how I got into study somatosensory system, which included touch, pain, and proprioception. I initially focused on touch. Interestingly, studying touch sort of led me to the study of pain. Part of that is when in painful conditions, so neuropathic conditions, touch become painful. How does that transition happens still remains largely unknown. So part of that motivation is that. The other part is, my personal experience. So after giving birth to my son, I started to have migraines, and it was actually quite painful. And with this, aura, I have migraine with aura. And also, my mother has trigeminal neuralgia.
Trigeminal is the facial circuits.
Yeah. So it was like, it was something like very, very painful when it sort of flares up. And I've been studying oral facial touch using mouse as a model. So, and I felt like I cannot help her at that time, right? So all of these motivated me to really further trying to understand pain. What is, pain, especially chronic pain? Is there a way to help people? Help myself, help my mother, and everyone who has pain. So that's sort of this long story how I came to pain.
And I'm a little curious about early on when you said you first knew you would be a scientist. Was there an earlier core memory before doing your PhD, maybe during your childhood, that there was some kind of thread of interest or curiosity, or was the brain science turn much later on?
I initially was very much interested in physics because Einstein is the hero, I think, for almost all scientific-oriented kids, right? So I really wanted to study physics, and then I just happened upon sort of I don't think it's a book, just I don't even know where I got it. It's just a little document that translated from English to Chinese, describing pan-field stimulation of different brain regions that elicit different sensations. And that's what fascinated me about the brain. So, and I just figured it's so interesting, I want to understand the brain.
I'm curious about different views that people have on pain. If you could maybe describe how maybe people within the neuroscience field, what differs in terms of perspectives on pain, and also maybe how like a neuroscientist might see pain different than like a physiologist.
I would say clinicians treat patients when they look at the patients. Usually, nobody comes into clinics for acute pain, right? Unless it's massive, like burn and all that. But if you just have a little bit of cut, and if you have a blister, you touch the hot stove, you don't go see doctors, right? Okay. Usually for the people with pain and seeing doctor to treat pain, not some other disease, is a chronic pain. Okay. Now, for neuroscientists, me included, for the longest part, what I actually think we study is acute pain rather than chronic pain. Because to get into mechanistic studies, you need animal models, but animal models are honestly not as good to mimic chronic pain, right? Okay, so I think that is one main difference. Obviously, with a scientific limitation, you have to use animal models to model chronic pain, but whether or not they really mimic, right, this chronic condition in humans is still up for debate, but we do what we can do, right, as a scientist. Another thing, I would say, the field of basic science study, my lab included, for the longest time focus on what I say, nociception. It's basically how sensory neurons, and then so this feed-forward pathway from sensing peripheral injury or painful stimulation that sends information to the brain. Right. So much of the work focus on sensory neurons, or we call nociceptors.
And it's all about characterizing the A delta C fibers and the like prostaglandin that gets released there, and all of the chemical reactions, but at the very periphery.
At the very periphery, right? Very little, and I think you alluded to this in the conversation we had the other day, is paid attention to how the brain actually has a top-down role in predicting what the sensory experience will be, right? So this is central region in the brain that, based on experience, already generating expectations of certain situation, whether that will be painful or not, has been really poorly understood. And there is studies in humans on expectation, what not, the nocebo effect, right? You're expecting pain, and then therefore you get pain. But such study has been very difficult, or very little has been done in this regard, this top-down modulation in animal studies. And I would say too much is focused on nociceptor rather than think about pain as a whole body response. And in pain has both this sensory component, which we call nociceptor, the A deltas and the C's, but also has this emotional component. This emotional component, this is suffering, this negative, this sort of amplification, that has been much less studied in animal models.
Right. So the clinicians focus on the symptoms, and the neuroscientists have been focused for a long time on the peripheral aspect of nociception. When it comes to neuroscience of pain, could you paint a little picture of like what the stances are that different people have about it? If there's some sense of the active questions of debate in the neuroscience of pain right now.
I would honestly say we haven't fully reached that, debate stage. We're still in the stage almost like everyone is trying different things. We're still filling out the elephant. Now the large part of the elephant we keep discovering new things, and then it just seems the elephant is very, very large. The reason you think about it, right? It seems to be easy to just focus on nociceptors, and then to find molecules and then to block nociceptors, right? But on the other hand, if you think about the pain, there's gazillion different kind of pain, and they all come in different flavors with different manifestations. So is pain a symptom? At what point pain become a disease? Is treating symptom the best way to treat it without treating underlying disease? So all of pain is vast. So I actually think we haven't reached the state that there are strong theories about this way or that or other way. Unfortunately.
Interesting. So it's in even before the place that people can have very principled stances. It's much more like, my research interest is the lower back and the role of those particular neurons or nociceptors of pain.
Or arthritis pain, cancer pain,
which
migraine,
is so crazy.
Neuropathic pain, chemotherapy pain, diabetic pain. There's just too many, right?
But do you think that fundamentally those types of pain are different? Do you not think that there's some way in which they are deeply, very, very similar?
I do think there's deeply very, very similar. The deeply very, very similar component is you hate it. You want it to go.
Is the
and
affective
you can't stand
aspect.
it. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. The actual different tissue injuries cause different kind of pain, but with the affective aspect is you hate it, you don't want it, you want it to go away.
So I know you're not an evolutionary biologist, but I'm wondering if you could give some sense of how you think of the role of pain in evolution.
I think pain does have a protective. If you look at these painless people, right, which they have a sodium channel called NaV1.7 or SCN9A. Without the sodium channel, they don't feel pain, right? But they get injured easily. They don't even know they're injured. They were burned or they have a bone fracture and all that. So obviously, as a human, you have others and surrounding you and can get tell you, okay, you got injured, you should see a doctor. But during evolution, you think about you have this gene mutation in animals, you won't be able to survive. So I think pain absolutely is important for animal survival, and that's why it evolved in evolution.
We know it's important for survival, but exactly how?
So we have to first distinguish nociception from pain. Okay, so all animals avoid some sort of so-called noxious stimuli. Even Hydra, if you touch it, it shrinks with the simplest nerve net. We don't call that pain. So, and Drosophila, obviously, fruit fly, they also have nociception, detect noxious stimuli, right? They will, stay away from harmful insult.
Right.
Do they have pain? Right. So pain, one in animal kingdom that we say animal have pain. Okay, this is a question there's no way to answer unless you're human, because we say we're in pain. But a mouse, let's say, when I give them a little laser, which is painful, like a thermal laser.
Yeah.
They will lick and wipe. We use licking and wiping, the soothing behavior
As a proxy for
as
pain.
a proxy for pain, right? Surely they have nociception. The question is, when you elevate this level, when during evolution, this almost like a perceptual cognitive aspect of pain exists.
It's really like the consciousness question.
Yeah.
Because, when we talk about the affective component, that's what we mean, that there's like a conscious experience of the pain, right?
Yeah.
And so that's partly why it's so linked with, that's why the curiosity for consciousness also brings you to pain, or there's some kind of relationship between the two?
I think so, yeah. And that's why, any seizure is knock you out. You lose consciousness and you lose pain perception, then doctors can operate on you, right? So really, it's intimately linked to consciousness itself, right? Pain makes us very much aware of our consciousness, right? Because you need that in order to perceive it.
What do you think about the framing of pain as specifically for protective action?
Yes, I like that, but then everyone asks this question: why chronic pain, right? What is it? What is that good for? Yeah, what is that good for? Max, what do you think?
Oh yeah, well, there's a lot of different. Basically, I think that it seems to me that the chronic pain is pretty clearly a maladaptive. It's like the autonomic nervous system is out of balance, and that can be recalibrated. And the reason that I think that's true is that there's so many cases of people who do have persistent pain, but through careful awareness attunement exercises are able to come back into calibration and to not experience the pain. So yeah, I think of it as like there's a bunch of radio antennae and they're tuned slightly off. They're not calibrated to the environment, and it goes haywire and it creates this pain.
Yeah, so in that regard, casting pain as a protective mechanism, but it could be this alarming system that may be too sensitive. It's like a smoke detector or send off alarm, but there's no real smoke because of the internal works or a change. The sensors are a little bit too sensitive. Yeah, that I like that analogy. You mentioned autonomic system, so this I think is a understudied aspect in pain. Especially in animal studies, we focus so much on the nociceptor, the sensory aspect, that we almost forgot this emotional aspect is very much rooted in body's autonomic responses, right? And so if you think about anxiety or all of these emotions, or fear or anger, right? Where do you feel it? You feel it in the body, right? And then these emotions are felt in the body, same as pain. When you have this emotional responses you felt in the body, there are actually multiple sort of neural loops in the central nervous system that amplify these autonomic responses. The sensory neurons themselves come into the spinal cord, and then through a local circuit can already talk to the presynaptic neurons that then talk to sympathetic neurons and drive sympathetic responses. Then there's a longer loop going to the from spinal cord going to the brainstem that has a longer loop regulating, a larger region, a larger sets of sympathetic responses in the brainstem. Then there's a further loop going to amygdala, which is the emotional center, that also then come back down to generate even more complex autonomic responses related to pain. So these are loops and loops of autonomic responses.
So the nociceptive view is like, oh, it's just going from here up to the brain.
Yeah.
But what you're pointing out with the autonomic nervous system is that there are a bunch of clustered, linked feedback loops where it's like there's a prick, or maybe there's more persistent pain, and it causes this loop, which causes this loop, which causes this loop. And then each of these loops are kind of in some type of a dance, and that's creating this pain. Would that be fair?
And amplify it.
And
Okay, so
amplifies the
you
pain.
think about fundamentally, why do you need a emotional response, and what is emotional response at the core of it, right? So autonomic system is slow, unlike the skeletal muscles. You move and you can stop immediately. These cardiac muscles or smooth muscles of the vasculature, they're slowly activating and then slowly stopping. The slowness can lead to persistent activation. See, remember when you run, your heart rate increases. And you stop running, your heart rate takes much longer time to come down, right? So it has this lingering effect. Now, imagine your nociceptors already triggers this autonomic response. Then the next wave of pain comes in. Another burst of firing. And then the sympathetic and the parasympathetic changes, the autonomic system is in the altered state, then this next pain signal coming in would further increase, right? So the add on top of that amplifies the painful signal. If you are not aware of this loops of loops, you can really lead to a persistent state. That the loops just sustain themselves. Because of this autonomic response is slow and slow in decay. If you're not careful, they just amplify itself and sustain itself.
It feels like the previous dominant metaphor that drove the nociceptive research was that we are kind of like mechanical machines, but fairly straightforward ones. But what you're pointing out also, what you're pointing out with the autonomic stuff is that a better analogy is that we are like a complex ecosystem where there's nonlinear dynamic interactions between internal feedback loops. And that's part of why it's so hard to even build a general theory of pain.
Yes, I completely agree with you.
Would you say that pain consists of the nociception and then there's this autonomic response?
Which is emotional, the physical manifestation of the emotional response, yes.
Right, and then there's the activation of the particular brain regions like the ACC or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? That's, I guess, the nociception, the autonomic response, and then the brain regions.
And then the cognitive appraisal, right? So some sort of a thought process, And so the cognitive, I think so. I think if we think about it, it's nociception, autonomic responses, and then cognitive aspect.
But cognitive could include the whole brain or whole being too?
The cognitive neuroscience wouldn't say that. Cognitive neuroscientists would think cognition is very much in the frontal cortex, right? So I think ACC is part of the frontal cortex. So the true perception, conscious awareness of this is pain, right? I think maybe we call that sort of a more high level cognitive. But then there's all these neurobiological process at the lower levels from spinal cord to even the amygdala. Then we can call that it's just a process that evoke both sensation and the autonomic responses.
So I guess the thing that I was kind of trying to get at is that it seems like this is at least the beginnings of an outline of a theory of pain. Because if you can say that it's crucially the autonomic nervous system and the nociception and those particular brain regions, then you might have something that's potentially falsifiable, right? Like someone comes in and we're pretty confident that heart rate variability, skin conductance, general heart rate are all pretty close proxies for someone experiencing pain, right? But if we brought someone in, for example, who had those symptoms when we exposed them, but they reported no pain, or vice versa, would that disprove or would that teach us anything new?
In these the schemes, again, is where it goes in the machine. Pain is compared to no pain. So there is a comparison, as always. So everyone is different. So who sets the threshold? Your pain threshold and my pain threshold is different. Sometimes certain things happen to you from outside perspective, surely painful, and you don't feel pain, right? Okay, you feel or not feel pain, there's a reference point. So who sets this reference point in the brain? Where is that reference point is set? Now, in terms of sensory response, what is the sensory threshold? Now, in terms of autonomic responses, at what range the brain decided it's bad, right? So we mentioned autonomic response include heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, heart rate variability, skin nerve conductance. You can be very happy and have heart rate increases and heart rate.
Would your HRV decrease though, or?
It probably can decrease. It depends on how ecstatic you are, right? And blood pressure could changes. So autonomic response themselves alone may not be a true indicator whether or not you're in pain. Someone needs to integrate it somewhere in the brain. Something is integrated and says, and together with the nociceptive input plus this autonomic input, and compared to whatever you said previously as a reference point, say this is bad.
So would you say that objectively measuring pain cannot be done until we, in some sense, solve the problem of consciousness?
That's too high a bar. I actually think with autonomic responses as plus some other measurement, you could have a putatively, relatively objective measurement. The reason I say that is in animals, they do not have sophisticated cognition, may not have the ability to have too much expectation or hiding their their true feelings. So therefore, using the behavior, this self-caring behavior, as well as autonomic measurement, then you can ground, right, this pain in physiology. I think that can help research to really have a better, more objective measurement of pain responses in animal studies. In humans, now we do not have comprehensive, surprisingly, measurement of humans' autonomic responses in diverse type of chronic pain, right? So the jury is out there. Until we measure these, we would not know whether or not there are reliable markers that together you can predict pain, not just with a simple one or two measure, but if you measure a bunch of them together, there may be a sort of better marker, better description, more objective measure.
But what I also hear there is that ultimately the yardstick or the measurement for if we know if someone's in pain is we ask them, are you in pain, right? And sometimes they can be wrong because they're maybe like unable to talk or there's some type of brain damage or something like that. But ultimately everything is going to be compared against that, right? And so even if we get really, really good biomarkers or whatever, all that gives us is something that allows us to predict with pretty high confidence, right, what they're going to end up saying.
Yes. So then the question is, why do we want a objective measure, right? So I think it does help. So in my view, measuring these physiological responses help find ways to see whether or not you normalize these physiological responses. Would that then relieve pain? Does that make sense? Because in a lot of pain conditions, you don't see a structural change with current measurement, right? The tissue seems already healed, nothing's wrong, right? But then if you think about it, it could be that you just have non-coherent vascular perfusion of this tissue. So not in sync with the tissue in a way that if the tissue needs oxygen, it's not there, but then when the tissue is not in need, then oxygen is given. For example, I'm just making a hypothetical situation, right? So if we know of these physiological, then you think about it, when you don't have structural changes, why is the tissue sending the signals to the brain, and then the brain amplifies, also confirms something's wrong? It could be just the physiology is not in its most, harmonic state, right? And then therefore, I think understand the physiology, it can modulate the physiology, may make the tissue then sending correct signal, saying, okay, I'm okay now, right? Everything's in balance. So I think that's why I felt like instead of just treating it as a symptom, let's remove nociceptive responses from sensory neurons, then you can then actually help treating the underlying disease, normalize the tissue situation, then normalize the brain tissue body interaction. I think that is what I see, why using physiological measurement is sort of a way to understand pain better, may even develop better treatment.
So it's like we have a computer, and the computer is somehow not working very well, and we don't really understand the software, we don't understand how that works, but we can see the hardware, and we can change little bits about the hardware. And maybe it's a software fault, or maybe it's like a complex link between all of them, and we can still improve the overall condition by changing a little bit of the hardware. That, for example, maybe you have a bug in Microsoft Word on your computer. You could debug Microsoft Word, but you could also wipe your whole operating system and then reinstall another operating system or something like that, and then that could also fix it. It's a much more like brute force way of doing it.
There are things, let's say, psychogenic pain, right? It's based on anxiety, and all that. That type of thing generated pain. I think it is probably software problem. The actual hardware structure is okay, right? But then obviously there's also hardware problem, but the hardware seems already healed. It's just the communication with the previous software hasn't been updated. Okay, now, so how do you update the software to now communicate with the new norm of the tissue, because it went through something, went through some trauma, but now need a new way to communicate, right? So in a way, the tissue healed, but the system, let's say the vasculature that delivers what the tissue needed, right? The vasculature as well as the lymph system, immune system that interact with this hasn't been updated. And these are also hardwares. The brain can control these type of hardwares, right? Through the top-down control of the autonomic system, the ganglionic neurons, right? Sympathetic and parasympathetic system, which then can talk to the vasculature and talk to the immune system. So if we think about the actual vasculature and immune system are also hardwares. They needed to be updated to interact with the other hardwares. I think you're right. It's like you update part of your computer, but the other part of the hardware hasn't been updated. And then you realize, okay, I need to update the component to work with the new hardware. I like that. Yeah. And then but the beauty is the brain itself can generate the correct signals.
Yeah. Unlike computers, at least unlike current computers, by writing new software, the hardware will rearrange itself too. Why you think we have chronic pain? Reports about 600 to 800 million people have persistent lower back pain, non-specific lower back pain. Presumably many more millions have other types of chronic pain. Do you have a theory of why there seems to be such a prevalence of chronic pain, historically high prevalence of chronic pain?
So I view pain as a brain-body disease. It may start either from the brain or from periphery, but then they amplify each other, okay? And I think you kind of also see it that way. So different chronic pain is a different brain-body diseases, because you need the brain to perceive it, and then sort of expecting it, and then trigger all the other responses, and then the tissue is also obviously not in some sort of homeostasis, right? But then this loop just continue to go on and on. I think that's why it's a chronic condition. Now, why is the question? Does it serve any purposes? In 2020, the brain is facing a completely different world, right? Everything happens so fast. And so the brain operates on a different speed or time scale. And I think it may now be with body in sync. See, you really have to be in sync, brain body in this most harmonic state to feel healthy. If your body is in abnormal state, you could not function very well with your brain. And then if your brain is in this abnormal state, you're not taking care of the body, and then something will manifest in the body. So I actually think right now there's more and more pain. It really is a manifestation that in today's society, more and more people are not in sync. It's the body then tell you something's wrong. Pay attention. Can you find a new balance? I think pain in that sense in 2020, in the chronic stage, you can view that positively. It tells you, okay, you are not in this co-harmonic brain-body state, do something to it. If you view it positively, you try to find your way patiently, figure out what is the best way. I do not see pain as something so terrible. It is a signal tell you do something, but it's for the good of you, to help you reach a better state. Does that make sense? Because if you really think it is something terrible, bad, and hate it, and you just want to get rid of it, then you are inevitably going down the road of treating symptoms without really treating the underlying cause of it. Now, when you treat the symptom, okay, let's say you're in pain. Now you take something, some drug, magic drug happens. That's what opioid did, that you reach a no pain state. But that's sort of treating a symptom. So it make you feel you no longer have pain, right? And then if you set this as your reference point, your desired state, when the drug wears off, this then becomes more painful.
What about emotional pain?
Mental pain, emotional.
You call
pain.
it mental.
Yeah.
But didn't you say that the emotions are in the autonomic nervous system?
Yeah. So if you think about depression, you feel whole body is lack of energy, right?
But is the autonomic nervous system is separate from the brain, though, right?
But it is connected, right? So the ganglions are local.
Right.
The large older neurons are local in the body, but they are innervated by preganglion neurons in spinal cord and brainstem, and then these neurons innervated by brain, right? That's why thoughts of let's say, oh crap, where's my phone? And suddenly, because these days we also depend on the phone, right? The idea I lost my phone, it's a thought, but my heart rate already increased, right? So there is, from thought to this memory responses, the pathway is poorly understood, but certainly it's all connected.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's all connected. I guess I'm just curious about whether mental pain makes sense as a category, because if we just acknowledge that pain is always connected, then all pain is mental, right?
Yes, I would think all pain is brain body disease. You cannot just have a mental pain without bodily responses, just as you cannot have a body pain without mentally recognizing it, right?
So do you think emotional pain or pain when we have heartbreak, grief, is that type of pain the same in a deep way as lower back pain, persistent lower back pain?
The same aspect is again the affective component, that it's negative, that we do not like it. It's sort of considered bad. However, I would say that mental pain or emotional pain obviously do not have obvious tissue damage, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's usually not triggered by tissue or body damage. It is triggered by other mental damage. Let's put it. What they do share, this pain component, is this affective, this autonomic response, bodily response component. I would say, but one is more, in a way, the mental forms. The other is more bodily forms. Right?
At least that's how we like to compare them.
Yeah.
Because I also do think about in the midst of heartbreak, it really feels like your heart is in pain.
Yes.
Or your stomach sinks when you hear about the grief news. It really does feel like an embodied thing too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like phantom limb pain feels like you have no hand, but it feels like it's very localized there too. So yeah, there's something interesting in common between the affective components, definitely in common. There's some sorts of sensory components in common, but maybe we need to investigate more.
If you think about migraine, right? Okay, so I might be long-winded. Let me just unpack this. Okay, so for me, I have aura, which is caused by cortical spreading depression. That then, for me, triggers pain. Okay, so this for me, and immediately when aura starts, I know the pain is coming, and I'll take, Advil, and I lie down, turn off all the lights and all that. But there's also a group of people who just have cortical spreading depression. They never feel pain. They also have the aura, and also flashes and migraine, and they cannot drive like me, when that happens, you don't drive, but they never feel pain. Tissue damage, abnormality do not necessarily lead to a perceived condition. And the reason that aura with pain, without pain, the difference, nobody understands, right? Just like herniated disc may or may not cause lower back pain, right? So similarly, a traumatic experience, mental experience, in some people causes heartbreak responses, and the others just decided it's okay, it's an experience, and then I can move on, learn from it, right?
They might even feel the heart heaviness, but they don't feel the pain necessarily.
Yeah. So in that regard, there's similarities, right? It's whether or not you actually perceive mental pain or physical pain sometimes may not dependent on the similar sort of a sensory or emotional experience, right? Yeah, there's something else that then recognize it and then decide it, then triggers this pain state. And that part we don't understand, just like we don't understand consciousness.
There are certain people who don't experience pain or have abnormal pain conditions. On one end, there's people who are in pain all the time. On the other end, there's people with like the FAH out, FAH out gene, and then the other sodium channel disruption you mentioned. Do we know anything about how quote unquote emotional pain is for them? Do they experience less emotional pain in addition to less physical pain?
Very good question. So I know the FAH out woman. She says she's always happy. So again, just nothing bothers her, right? Okay. So I think that says she's just always in this happy state, and then she doesn't have this negative effect, therefore, in contributing to her, lack of physical and mental pain. For the sodium channel mutation people, there's so much focus on they do not perceive physical pain. I do not think there's a systematic study about whether or not they have emotional pain responses. What I do know is this channel is expressed by both nociceptive sensory neurons as well as sympathetic neurons. Okay, so probably deleting this channel not only blunted the nociceptive sensory response, but also blunted the triggered autonomic responses. So therefore, in my view, I think they would have a lesser emotional responses. Now, incidentally, all these drugs developed against this channel, right, which should be a drug to cure pain, have strong side effect, which is hypotension. People can faint because normally you need this channel for your sympathetic system to function normally, maintain your normal, blood pressure, heart rate and whatnot. Now you block it in normal, human beings who grow up with this gene, right? And then you just collapse the sympathetic system, you causes all these hypotension, fainting. That's why this is not a viable drug target. Whereas genetic mutations, there's ways as these humans, growing up, there's other compensations. So they probably use other sodium channels to keep their autonomic system, to be able to maintain the body functions.
But somehow that other autonomic system doesn't reactivate the pain pathway.
Right.
And that's...
Yeah, probably not as good as when you have these channels, right? Yeah. So
do we know how common either of these mutations are?
Not very common. Yeah. And that's why there's only limited number of people identified. But the gain of function of this channel, right? So meaning the channel opens too long, let too much ion comes in. A lot of them have this extreme pain. And what you see is their legs are like on fire, and then they're super red. Why is it super red? If the autonomic system, the sympathetic system, is in this hyperactive state,
all
right?
this inflammation that happens.
And drive inflammation, and then interact with. And obviously, you also need the nociceptors. It's a local nociceptor autonomic inner, feedback loops, and drives all these.
Wait, so you're saying that these are these the SCN9A channelopathy?
Gain of function,
So
they have
these
extreme pain.
Oh, these are the people who have the extreme pain.
Yeah.
But then that's one variant, but the other variant is the loss of function.
Yeah, then they don't have pain.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the extreme pain always involve, the legs look super red, and that there's just a lot of inflammation and all that. It's just this loop is constantly.
I imagine it's also hard to test if they're anxious or experience more emotional pain because they're already in
They're already
so
in
much
pain. They're already in this anxious state.
So can you say a little bit about how the pain and sensitivity differs between the the Fa out and the SCN9?
Because there's only one woman that have this Fa out, right? So actually, if you read the study, it's really interesting. Not only she's always very happy, the magic thing that she has, which I almost want that gene, is that her wound heals super fast. So it's kind of interesting, right? So the underlying mechanism is unclear. It's fascinating, So whereas the NaV1.7 or SCN9A loss of function, painless people, they get injured, but there's no report that the injury get healed faster, right? Whereas this woman have this magic ability, all the injuries heal much faster. So, and she's also always very happy and positive.
And so there's also many cases of people who don't feel pain dying early because they couldn't sense that their hand was internally bleeding or something like that. Were those all the SCN9A people, or do you know what I'm talking about?
There are a few other genes that have since been cloned. There are some transcription factors, and then a few other genes. So not necessarily all related to SCN9A. So there are other ways to seems to be painless types.
Yeah,
So.
And then there's also the monks or the long-term meditators. People like, there's a Dr. Daniel Ingram who gives this really incredible account of having a kidney stone while he's on shift at the hospital. And him being able to, first he perceived it as pain, and he said he was able to make this mental shift and then perceive it as sensation. And so I guess it swaps, the affective component goes away. And he was like, it was just very, very intense sensation, but I was able to just operate. But afterwards, I let go of the controls, and he said he ended up throwing up because the pain was so intense. But do you have any sense of what's happening with the people who are able to modulate their pain?
Yeah.
But who have normal genotypes, like most people?
So it is known if you lesion the somatosensory cortex, you still have pain, you just don't know where it is and what is it. Okay, but if you lesion anterior cingulate cortex, you would only have strong sensations and no longer pain. So that suggests there are two separate processing streams.
What if you lesion both at the same time?
That hasn't been done.
So these are deliberate lesions in people's brains?
Or people either have cancer or stroke, right?
See.
Yeah. So, and then in fact, cingulotomy was performed previously as a way to treat chronic pain. You get pain relief instantaneously, but the side effect is you become apathic. You are no longer have this emotional affective responses, which make it much harder to have social interactions.
Wait, so that's the S1 that gets that gets
That's ACC.
the ACC gets cut.
yeah.
You don't feel pain, but you don't also no emotional affect either.
Very little, yeah.
Wow.
So that you become flat. So that's not good, right?
Uh-huh.
That says it's an emotional response, right?
Sounds like some monks too.
Yeah. So the monks can then control it so that maybe shut down their ACC so that you only have S1 and you become, sensation without pain. Then when you
Right.
relax, this brain region come online and it's like, oh, this is so bad, and you generate all these autonomic response, and you will throw up, right?
Wow.
So, and then if you think about it, I had a kidney stone once, super painful, and they give me opioid instantaneously. The edge is off. I still have uncomfortableness. The sensation is there, but it's okay. It doesn't bother me.
So the opioid is acting on the ACC.
I think opioid acting on many, many regions, including autonomic systems and ACC, amygdala, whatnot, opioid receptors everywhere. So that just block out the affective component. And then all I have is, it's okay, it's just a sensation. Yeah, I can go back to work. Yeah. But obviously when the drug wears off, the pain comes out. But fortunately, the stone finally passed.
How do you think more broadly about what the effective interventions are for chronic pain? Now that we acknowledge that it's not a purely biomechanical thing.
I think education is important to tell people that be aware of these emotional autonomic components. So if you are aware of it, so that you don't amplify these. Right. Once you amplify these, then it becomes more painful. The negatives. If you're just really dreading it, it becomes more and more painful. Right. So be aware of these responses, and B, I think we needed to have devices. So that's in my dream that can actually help detect these concurrent happening autonomic responses, and then maybe give a real-time feedback so that you can modulate these. If your own brain power is not strong enough to dampen down these emotional response, maybe devices can help with a real-time feedback. That would be the dream, and I think that.
So it would be like, for example, a smartwatch, and you are just beginning to do something that might trigger a larger onset of pain, and so it just flashes. It's like take a breath or something.
Yeah. Okay. Learn to, maybe learn some ways, either breathing or doing something distracting yourself, right? Find many other ways to use your own power, your brain and body responses, rather than depending on drug, right? And I think that's the advantage of having a device that can sense this preemptively and then tell you to do something preemptively before this whole loop starts.
Is there anything more specific that you might point to for people?
It may sound non-sciencey, mindfulness, be aware of it. Okay, but if I change the word mindfulness into meta-awareness, then it sounds more sciencey, isn't it? Meta-awareness is really awareness of awareness, and I think that's the essence of mindfulness, just knowing, okay? So the reason I think it's useful, this awareness of awareness, is it actually just being awareness of what's happening, you become a witness, right, of your sensory and physical and autonomic responses. Becoming a witness will actually prevent this positive loop become amplified and continue sort of a positively feedback and then get out of control, right? If you're just aware of it, it's easy said, but when you're really in pain, you kind of just taken away by the pain. This is so bad. I hate it. And
fused with it.
You're
right?
totally fused with it. Yeah, that's why if you have a way to really cultivate this mindfulness, meta-awareness, can be a witness that at least can dampen it or prevent it from really getting out of control. So I think everyone should learn a little bit about mindfulness, regardless whether or not you a meditator or not. I think that helps you.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense, especially if we think about the body as a complex system that coordinates via attention and awareness. that simply shifting the attention and the awareness, of course, can allow the body intelligently to solve different types of problems.
Yes.
And that might mean preventing fusion with the pain that's arising right now.
Yeah, exactly. Once you fuse it, it takes on its own life, and then you just amplify it. You need to step back, have the ability to be a witness, and then let your really smart body and brain to help, to stop it. Yeah.
What do you think about some of the ideas about blurred body maps being linked with pain? So some people say that, the 2-point discrimination test for people with lower back pain, it's predictably worse than than for people who don't have lower back pain.
Yeah, so I think that could be, again, that means the body map changes, which is the sensory part changes, right? And then there has to be something try to interpret, make sense. When this interpreter really wanted, compared to what it normally or previously when the body is normal, now dysmorphic, then it decided this is bad. See, again, there's some things doing a comparison in the brain, and then this comparison leaded to say, okay, this current state is bad. So
still you're saying that the map may be a little bit more superficial, because the thing that's still causing the pain is this interpretation of it.
Yeah.
Some people might have blurred maps but still be able to remain quite calm.
Yeah. Yeah, if they decided to accept it as is, and then sort of build a new norm, right? Rather than I wanted to go back to what I think is the best. Yeah, just have to sort of adapt, drive the positive adaptation rather than, wanting to go back to what it think is normal, right?
Yeah, I've had some thoughts that how Qigong and some other modalities like Feldenkrais work is that it improves the body maps. And what I hear you saying is that could help, that plausibly helps, just like it can help the nociception. But there's also the deeper interpretive work that maybe is working with like the anterior cingulate cortex.
Yeah, to sort of accept it, the new norm, and then find a new way.
Yeah.
And the new body map can also be useful and productive and and good, right?
Yeah. And plausibly we should just combine all of these.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think are the most important problems in the neuroscience of pain.
I think is the most important aspect of pain, and then the neurobiology of self that I teach. You see, if from a Buddhist perspective, self is an illusion. If you're able to really deeply believe that, or actually recognize that self is illusion, then does pain even matters? Would that bothers you? Because you don't even exist, let alone you feeling pain, right? It then just becomes a process, a phenomenon. It happens. It's almost like you just become the meta-awareness and let these process be itself. Happens, come and goes.
So is the question, if you're able to recognize the illusory nature of self, then do you feel pain?
Yeah, then the pain itself, it's just a process.
So let
it happen, let it go, come and go.
We might be able to empirically test that, right? Just bring some very long-term meditators in, and then you have different stimuli, and then you can see.
Yeah, how they react to it. Can they just assume a sort of a in a way, they're just become, like I said, have this meta-awareness, but this meta-awareness is not this physical self, right? It is, something that we cannot describe with language. But then it'll be okay, right? Fundamentally, like we've been talking about, I started with trying to understand ghosts in the machine, but there's no ghost in the machine. There's not a single part in the brain you would say that the I, does the self reside, right? Now everything is a process. Pain is a process too. There's a sensory process, there's autonomic process. But if you just focus on these processes, there's no self. It's just neurobiological process. Same as thought is a process. It comes and goes, right? Whereas this self, this illusory self, doesn't exist because there's no place that is stable, that is unchanging, right? Every single neuron changes, pain changes, come and go. It's not like the same pain all the time. And feelings too. And so all of these are not permanent. They keep changing. Then there's not a sort of a stationary self, yet we feel something is permanent, didn't change in through this process. Okay, that does not exist in any part of this body. That is undescribable, and I don't know what is that.
So that's the broader, most important question that you feel. Are there versions of that that can hash out in a nearer term research program?
Because we still live in, we feel we still live in this body, and very much still want every human being on earth to not feel pain. Therefore, understanding these processes, finding ways to use these processes to heal these processes is still very much, I think, a very worthwhile goal, and I want very much to do that. But ultimately, I do think, so to be honest, I'm a Buddhist, so ultimately I wish I can reach the stage that I understand what is this undescribable knower, this awareness. I don't know what is that. This non-self knowing.
So that's maybe first-person research.
Which by current scientific standard is not very sciencey.
Do you think that understanding of self is something that can arise out of running RCTs or experiments like that?
I hope so, but I cannot come up with a sort of experiment that satisfies me yet. So,
have there been any studies that have been towards that direction that you've come
I mean,
across?
it is always, so the closest everyone thinks the default mode network in the brain is where, autobiographic self lives, right? It is when you think about yourself, your default mode network activated, and your views, your beliefs, your political stance, all of these seems to activate, when you think about these, activate the default mode network. That is quote unquote maybe the seed for this perceived self. There are experiments done that using functional MRI, you can have real-time feedback and then ask the subject to do whatever they can do to lower the activity of default mode network. And then usually if you are successfully using real-time functional MRI feedback to lower the activity of default mode network, you can enter into a flow state. So that state, things just happen, but you don't need to think about self, And then if you think about flow state, right, the musicians and the poets, things just happen without them having this, high level cognitive deciding what music note to play, how to compose. It seems things just flow out. And when you don't have this sense of self, this so-called, little you, little self, right? You're just in this flow state. So I think it is very hard to elicit the flow state so that we can sort of really good scientifically, dissecting the nitty-gritties and the mechanisms to enter into that, right? Unfortunately, but I think that is an interesting state to study. That is, things just flow out effortlessly, and then you are not thinking about self. Self disappears in that state. That could be interesting to study. I just don't know how to study that in a systematic way. Certainly cannot study in animals to induce that. So, and then the current tools, are not high resolution enough to get at the sort of a neural underpinnings, the mechanistic insight. But I think at some point when technology further develops, then maybe we can study flow state and then also help people enter into flow state easier with some device. Who knows, right?
Yeah, there are some people building devices for this.
Yeah.
That I know of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? Everyone should experience some flow state.
Children often seem to experience more flow states.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think that children also have a less sense of a self?
Yeah. In fact, the default mode network only emerges as they develop, not in the beginning. So
Do you know roughly when in development?
I might be wrong. I think it's 8 years old, so something like that, or between 5 and 8. So, but early on they don't have default mode network.
So there's a story. There's a psychologist who writes about this by the name of Connie Ray Andreas, and she says her account of how the self first develops is that it's inherited, not genetically, but it's inherited in terms of behavior when children first are around a set of adults. And so there's some dual process where first the adults are walking around, and subtle ways that they talk and act convey that there is this sense of self which she sees as a restriction. And then there's also particular incidents. For example, the teacher's angry at you because you are late to class, and they point at you and they say, you are late here, and they begin to localize your sense of self in a very particular part of the body. I wonder what you make of that account.
I think that's right. Okay, I actually think that to build a sense of self, you use all your senses, because you touch something, you see something, you hear something. All of these aggregate, they overlap on top of each other, and then they're all here, right? It's all here. So these multisensory overlap allow you to suddenly concentrate all these different senses to this little region, and then therefore you embody this body, embody all the things it receives as a sense of self.
There's a fascinating thing of I hear accounts that different cultures tend to locate themselves in different parts. Like in the West, people tend to locate themselves behind their eyes, somewhere around here. But in Asian cultures, in the heart, like when there's this sheen there, or there's just a lot of emphasis on this heart region. So you think under this account, then does that suggest that the patterns, there's a cultural component to self, but also maybe that where people naturally will point and will direct their attention is leading to that in these different cultures? Because to me that means that the sense of self is actually very deeply cultural too.
And especially where that is, right? I think I'm very much, when I point to myself, I'm a heart pointer. I don't point at here. Yeah, I think cultural component definitely plays a major role in sort of this general location where you think it is. I think Western culture, I would say, the Western scientific culture, that leads you to think the brain controls everything, and therefore the self is located here. Whereas Eastern culture, it seems to be maybe more think your body, right, is and because you embody the body, so then maybe the heart is where the true self comes from. I don't know. I think culture definitely plays a major role in where you think the self is. But there are also scientific experiments that you can get out of self illusions, right? So these things has been done. If you have a goggle, you see yourself from back. If there's a synchronized stroke of your own back, and then you project the image, right? After a while, because you're seeing it, you're feeling it, these two sensory information happen simultaneously, and you think what you see through a goggle, yourself is there, right? Okay, what is really remarkable is you can, instead of stroking simultaneously your own back and then you see it being stroked, you just online flash the same heart rate. So you can measure your heart rate and then flash the heart rate. With this flashing, you can embody that person. That says you embody yourself very much because you sense your autonomic response and the heart rate,
Are
heartbeat
synced.
is very much, drives the sense of you feel that all the time, right? So then if you sync the heart rate, you can actually easily embody a sort of a VR image of yourself in that you feel like yourself is there rather than here.
And you can do that with other people too. Maybe more of the time you can have the sense that you and everyone are actually the same, connected in a way.
Yeah.
That might be, then people might be more compassionate and whatnot.
Yeah, so we're all together rather than, so individualized, competing. We can be together.
One line of interest would be in also exploring how you might enable that for people, is like being able to shift the sense of self around.
Yes, so I would almost consider I have my own job, science research with animal studies, and then my other interest is to really help educate the public and then to somehow do things for humans. And I don't know how. It's still a little bit far-fetched from what I have now. I'm constricted based on my history, my training, my current position, but I do very much hoping to help people to start understanding we are not so separated. We're actually quite connected in some way. I don't know how yet.
Fan Wang, thank you very much.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you for joining. If you're interested in resources for the science and practice of resolving pain, you can head to the link in the show notes or go to processing-pain.com/sign_up. See you all next time.